On our newscast tonight, prosecutors expand their probe into embezzlement and tax evasion allegations against the chair of the CJ Group. They've summoned the nation's former tax office chief in for questioning. And Korea's rival parties are still bickering over the special parliamentary probe into the National Spy Agency's potential influence last year's presidential election. One side wants guarantees that the former leaders of the relevant organizations turn up. The other side feels guarantees are not necessary. 3 in the bag and 1 more to get into the record books. Korean golfer Park In-bi is on the verge of becoming the world's first female golfer to win 4 major events in a single season. She will have her place in history if she can continue her dominance in this week's British Open. Stay with us for these stories and more.
It is 5 a.m. in Washington, D.C., 10 in Edinburgh, and 6 on a Thursday evening here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition of 6. I'm Moon Gon-young.
And I'm Daniel Chen. Thank you for joining us. Our starting point for today, new names named for involvement in the CJ tax evasion fiasco.
Where a former chief of the National Tax Agency appeared before prosecutors earlier this morning for questioning over allegations that he took bribes from CJ Group in exchange for favors during a tax audit into the food and entertainment giant in 2006.
Meanwhile, later in the afternoon, the head of the Seoul Regional Tax Office offered to step down following his implication in this bribery scandal. Our Kim In-ji reports.
In an ongoing fight against corruption, state prosecutors summoned former tax office chief Jeon Goon-Pyo on Thursday for allegedly taking bribes. Jeon is accused of receiving $300,000 and luxury watches from CJ Group in 2006 after he was named the head of the National Tax Service. Prosecutors said Jeon's deputy Heo Byung-yik admitted passing on a bribe from CJ Group to Jeon. Ha, who became the tax office chief later, was arrested on Saturday and admitted to taking the money and gifts, but claimed that he handed them to Jeon. Jeon has denied the allegations. Meanwhile, recent investigations have revealed that many irregularities involving the tax office. Local reports say that the office was supposed to collect 1.85 trillion won, or roughly $1.65 billion, more than it did between 2009 and March this year, raising suspicions of corruption within the agency. Underscoring the importance of stamping out corruption among civil servants, the cabinet passed a bill toughening penalties on government officials who take bribes. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
And in the nation's political arena, Korea's 2 main political parties have locked horns over the witness list for an ongoing parliamentary probe into the spy agency's alleged interference in last year's presidential election. The scandal has rattled the nation, and the opposition Democratic Party is currently holding a public demonstration in protest against what it sees as inaction by the other side. Here's Arirang News Jeon Gil with this report.
The rival parties are still wrangling over who will be on the witness list for the special parliamentary probe looking into whether the nation's spy agency meddled in last year's presidential election. The main opposition Democratic Party wants guarantees that former leaders of the National Intelligence Service and National Police Agency will appear for questioning. The ruling's Henry Party agrees they should be questioned, but does not think the guarantees are necessary. To protest the ruling party's position, the Democratic Party is holding a public demonstration here at Seoul Plaza in front of City Hall. It has been 20 months since main opposition party staged an outdoor protest outside the National Assembly. The leader of the Democratic Party's special committee dedicated to the probe said Wednesday that he is running out of patience.
The nation's spy agency and the National Police Agency illegally interfered in last year's presidential election. It is uncertain whether the former chiefs in question will be attending the upcoming hearings. Therefore, we are here to ask for the public support until the truth is revealed.
This Henry Party says the Democratic Party just wants to delay the parliamentary investigation into the NIS scandal.
The Democratic Party is trying to break up the parliamentary probe. This is a suicidal act by the main opposition party.
The National Assembly is looking into whether the spy agency interfered in last year's presidential election by posting comments favoring the Saenuri Party candidate, current President Park Geun-hye. Meanwhile, the investigation has also been stalled by bickering between the rival parties over who will represent the parties on the parliamentary committee charged with conducting the probe, and whether a briefing by spy agency officials should be open to the public. The briefing is scheduled to start on August 5th. Jeon Goon-Pyo, Arirang News.
Japanese Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso is backpedaling from recent comments he made about Nazi Germany. He spoke out Thursday and said his comments were taken out of context. Whether there will be enough to quell the angry reaction his remarks sparked inside and outside of Japan remains to be seen. Our Hwang Sung-hee has the details.
Facing heavy criticism from both home and abroad, Japanese Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso retracted earlier remarks that suggested Japan should learn from Nazi Germany's constitutional reform. Speaking to reporters on Thursday, Aso explained that his comments were taken out of context and said that he holds an extremely negative view of the Nazis and the Weimar Constitution. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga echoed this view.
I want to make it clear that the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe cabinet will never view the Nazi government positively.
During a lecture earlier this week, Aso suggested that Japan learn from Germany's pre-war constitutional revision. He said the Weimar Constitution was transformed by the Nazis before people realized what was happening. The Deputy Prime Minister's controversial remarks came as Japan is mulling a revision of its pacifist constitution, which currently restricts the military to a self-defense role. It was the latest in a string of offensive remarks coming from Japanese politicians. Just over 2 months ago, Osaka Mayor Toru Hashimoto claimed that military sexual slavery during World War II was necessary for keeping Japanese troops in order. South Korea's foreign ministry addressed the recent controversy once again on Thursday.
We urge the Japanese government and high-level officials to be more cautious about what they say and do in the future.
Experts say the upcoming Korean Independence Day on August 15th could become another stumbling block for Seoul-Tokyo ties, as Japanese officials will most likely pay their respects at the controversial Yasukuni War Shrine on this day. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Moving on, the U.S. House of Representatives has passed a piece of legislation that calls for peace and reunification on the Korean Peninsula in recognition of the 60th anniversary of the Korean War armistice. The legislation was introduced by Senator Timothy Kaine last week and passed unanimously on Thursday. The Senate is also expected to pass a concurrent resolution in the near future. The House bill recognizes the historical importance of the Korean War, while calling on North Korea to cease its nuclear weapons programs and resume talks for peace and reunification on the peninsula.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with heroes and experts to help you understand the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best, with Moon Gun-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Now shifting gears to the economy, Korean import prices rose by... Korea's consumer prices remained well below the central bank's inflation target band last month, but there are growing concerns about the inflation rate in the second half of the year. The main risks are currency fluctuations and the rising prices of agricultural products. Here's our Hwang Ji-hye with the details.
Korea's consumer prices grew at its fastest pace in 5 months in July, but was still in the 1% range for the 9th straight month. Statistics Korea said Thursday that the nation's inflation gained 1.4% last month from the same period a year earlier, after rising 1% in June. The consumer inflation rate in July remains well below the central bank's inflation target band of 2.5% to 3.5% this year. The pressure of rising prices, however, is expected to increase in the second half of the year. The central bank said in its recent report that it expects inflation to grow 2.1% in the second half from the previous year, accelerating from an estimated 1.3% in the first half. The bank cautioned against possible price hikes of domestic agricultural products due to weather conditions and the U.S. Federal Reserve's planned stimulus tapering, which could weaken the Korean won. A depreciating Korean won will cause price hikes of imports like crude oil and raw materials. The central bank says the rise in public transportation fees and heating bills in the second half is also expected to push up the nation's consumer prices. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, it's business as usual on the nation's trade front as Korea posted a trade surplus for the 18th consecutive month in July. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said Thursday that Korea logged exports of $45.8 billion last month, up 2.6% from a year earlier. Now, IT, mobile devices and semiconductors led the growth, all expanding more than 20% on year. But the overall trade surplus shrank from the previous month to $2.7 billion as imports grew at a faster rate than exports. Inbound shipments reached $43.1 billion, rising 2.7% from the same month last year.
Over in the U.S., the Federal Reserve has decided to keep its stimulus program in place for the time being, offering no clarification on when it will start scaling back. But with growth widely expected to pick up in the latter half of the year, economists say a tapering off of the stimulus may not be too far away. Our Yoo reports.
The U.S. Fed has given no indication that it's planning to reduce its bond buying in coming months, saying only the economy is still in need of support, although it continues to recover.
More generally, with the recovery still proceeding at only a moderate pace, the economy remains vulnerable to unanticipated shocks, including the possibility that global economic growth may be slower than currently anticipated.
In the statements following the two-day meeting on Wednesday, the central bank cited some unconvincing economic indicators for keeping the stimulus in place for the time being. It downgraded the pace of recovery in the first half of the year to modest from moderate and pointed to low inflation that's been hovering just over 1%. Policymakers seized low inflation as a risk to economic performance. The Fed also took note of the rise in mortgage rates, which could dampen growth in the housing market. Despite the Fed's dovish stance, economists say it may start dialing back its stimulus in September, as expected by many. Earlier on Wednesday, the government announced that the economy grew 1.7% in the second quarter of this year. That's up from 1.1% from the previous quarter and much better than many economists had expected. Looking forward, the Fed says it expects economic growth will pick up from its recent pace. Since last December, the Fed has been buying $85 billion in Treasury bonds and mortgage-backed securities a month. Back in June, Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke said it will start paring back the monthly purchases later this year and rid of them completely by mid-2014, as long as the economy shows solid growth. Yoo Rian, Arirang News.
The Chinese government has pledged to prevent growth from slipping below a reasonable level as manufacturing gauges gave a mixed picture of the strength of the world's second biggest economy. Are China's factories speeding up or slowing down? Well, it depends on who you ask.
China's official purchasing managers index got a boost in July, rising to 50.3 from 50.1 last month. And a number over 50 indicates an acceleration in the sector. But Beijing rate over slower growth than its recent economic data introduced some mild stimulus measures.
Right. Will Leakonomics, as it's been dubbed, work? And will the world's second largest economy be able to manage sustainable growth?
Joining us live to give us some perspective is Dr. Kim In-chul, professor of economics at Seoul-based Sungkyunkwan University. Thank you for making time for us again,
Glad to be
Professor.
Here.
All right, Professor Kim, since mid-July, Premier Lee Keqiang has made it very clear that his government will try to achieve the target of 7.5% growth with some policy easing measures, including more investment in infrastructure. Now, experts remain divided on whether he will be able to make good on that promise. What is your view?
Well, as you see, Lee Keqiang is the first premier who received the PhD in economics from Beijing University, and I believe that he knows what he's doing, and he is, quite good at, implementing short-term, stabilization policies as well as the long-term structural reforms. Now, speaking of, whether he's going to keep his word, not allowing the economic growth, below 7%. I think, he's the head of policy, economic policy in a socialist country, which is more authoritative, than a democracy. So once he gives a word publicly, his word, his promise will be fulfilled. So there's no question about that. And the thing is that, the statistical figures are also supported because last year's growth rate was, average annual growth rate was 7.8%. Now, the first quarter of this year, the growth rate was 7.7%. Now, the second quarter, 7.5%. Now, people in the global markets are wondering what will be, be the growth rate for the third and the fourth quarter. But I think it's going to be, to be safe, the growth rate is going to be between 7% and 7.5%. So his word is going to be fulfilled, I think that's what I believe true.
Right, the first leadership change in Beijing in over a decade. So I guess most people, when he says jump, they ask how high. What about the changes? Are they going towards the sustainable growth? The economy, is it soft landed right now, or are they gliding towards soft landing?
As I say, it's a socialist country. It's quite different than a democracy, although they are adopting a market system a lot. Now, still, early this year, Lee Keqiang announced the macroeconomic targets. So the growth target, 7.5% for this year, and the inflation target rate, 3.5%, and the unemployment rate, 4.6%. So they have all these target rates. And they have a policy instruments, fiscal and monetary policies, and they can spend money, for energy conservation and also environmental protection. So they have tools to achieve these targets. So I think this is a second phase of changing their growth policy strategy. They switched from the super high growth rate strategy to moderately high growth strategy. So it's going to be, I think they are on the right track. It's going to be good for the Chinese economy as well as for the whole world.
Right, and the whole entire world is keeping an eye on the Chinese economy because it is already the second largest and it is increasingly becoming very important in the global market. Now, let's talk about the impact of China's economics, if you will, whether it's a success or a failure will impact the Korean economy and the rest of the world.
Okay, economics is a three-pillar strategy. Retreat from stimulus policy and the structural reforms, and also deceleration of the economy, deleveraging the financial sector. So these are, well thought out, and these will help them to get on the right track, for the sustainable, stable growth for a long-term period. Otherwise, the fluctuations are just going up and down, and they realize that they no longer achieve, the more than 10% per annum growth every year. They cannot do that, forever. So they realize that they try to, set it at the 7% level, and they want to go, along with the U.S. the global economic recovery.
Right. Korea is, of course, an export-oriented economy, and we are dependent on China. China is the biggest export market for Korea. But because of this heavy reliance, how should Seoul prepare for possible downturns in Beijing?
Yeah, well, about 25% of Korea's total exports go to China. And of course, when Chinese economy slows down, our exports will slow down too. And in the same way, when China collapses, our economy will be in great danger, in crisis. But on the other hand, as China, Chinese leaders, realize that they want to keep, maintain the sustainable, growth with the reasonable, unemployment and reasonable inflation rate, and then that's going to help us too. Because our exports will increase steadily as we formulate long-term plans for investment and also export product. So we go with Chinese long-term, sustainable growth.
And not only Korea, but the rest of the world looks to China for its direction increasingly so.
Right. Well, of course, we have to put up with short-term, transitional adjustments, where we can, our growth rate would be slowed down a little bit to that extent. But overall, in the long term, we will also get on the right track.
All right, Dr. Kim In-chul, Professor of International Economics at Seoul University. Thanks so much for speaking with us this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
In response to growing unrest in the country after former President Mohamed Morsi was ousted, Egypt's interim government has ordered the police to immediately end all sit-in protests by Morsi's supporters, setting up a potentially bloody showdown. Our Connie Lee reports.
Supporters of ousted Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi defied orders and remained on the streets Wednesday, holding night prayers in Cairo, hours after Egypt's interim government ordered an end to all protests. In a televised statement, an official from the interim government said the sit-in protests and vigils in Cairo were a threat to Egypt's national security.
The cabinet has decided to take all means necessary to face these dangers and put an end to it.
The interim government even called on the police to end the protests, which have been continuing since the army removed Morsi from office in early July. Still, Muslim Brotherhood supporters say they are not discouraged and continue to call for the reinstatement of Morsi, despite the serious threat of violence.
The attempts to threaten and terrorize those participating in the sit-in continue. But I want to reaffirm that the numbers of those taking part are increasing.
We pay no attention to the statements of the Interior Minister or Foreign Minister, and we don't care whether America is with us or against us, or Europe for that matter.
The cabinet's latest order came a day after U.S. President Barack Obama asked Republican senators to go to Egypt and assess the situation there with military leaders and the opposition. This also comes after EU's foreign policy chief met with Morsi to talk about the current situation. Meanwhile, government officials in Egypt also announced that they will prosecute several Muslim Brotherhood leaders on charges of inciting the violence. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
And something that has never happened in the history of sports could occur this weekend. Korean golfer Park In-bi is trying to become the first player ever, male or female, to win 4 professional major golf championships in a single season. Park won the first 3 women's majors this year, and if she were to win the British Open at St. Andrews, which is currently underway, she'll win the Grand Slam of golf, something players like Tiger Woods, Jack Nicklaus, and Annika Sorenstam have never done. Well, round 1 is underway, and the 25-year-old Park is currently leading the pack at 6 under par.
Well, we talked about how China affects the rest of the world. I heard it's 40 degrees in China today, so let's turn to our Hannah Kim to check out what we can expect here in Korea. Hopefully not nowhere near 40.
Hello, Daniel. Well, Korea isn't hitting the 40s, but we are lingering close to the mid-30s. And so this ongoing heat wave is making it very uncomfortable, not to mention humid.
Right, and because of the monsoon season was so long this year, I hear summer will extend well into September as well.
Well, Kanyang, you heard right, because we should have more scattered showers across the country until early next week. The same holds true for tomorrow, but luckily the amount of precipitation shouldn't be too bad. If you're wondering whether to bring an umbrella out with you or not, have a small one ready just in case. If we take a closer look at tomorrow's forecast, in general, we expect mostly cloudy skies and the rain should begin in the south and make its way to the central provinces in the daytime. Seoul will start off the morning at 25 and reach 32. Meanwhile, cities in the south like Daegu and Gwangju will peak at 33 and 32 degrees respectively. Down on Jeju Island, we'll have mostly sunny skies and our highs will jump to 32. Daejeon will hit 31 while Dokdo tops out relatively lower in the mid-20s. Well, that's all I have for you today. I'm Hannah Kim and back to you guys.
Thanks for that, Hannah. And that's all from us for this hour. Thank you for watching. This has been Daniel Choi.
And I'm Moon Gon-young. Thank you as always for being here with us. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the evening and we'll see you right back here same time tomorrow. Good night.